Morning. Come and have a seat. Now, of course, I'm not going to go easy on you. There are some really big questions we've got to try and get answers to this morning. But I'll be fair, and we just want to hear what you've got to say. So, shall we get on with it?
We're rolling.
Here we go. Join me to hear from the biggest names inside and outside politics.
Sunday with Laura Koonsberg, tomorrow at 8:30 on BBC One and iPlayer.
Download the BBC News app now and get the latest headlines as they happen. Personalise your app to learn more about the stories you care about and watch BBC News live wherever you are. Stay up to date, whatever you're up to. Download the BBC News app.
Good evening. More than 50,000 rail workers have walked out today, causing the biggest strike disruption on the railways this year. Only around 11% of the usual Saturday timetable is able to run. It's the first time 4 rail unions have taken action on the same day in their long-running disputes over pay, jobs and conditions. Our transport correspondent Katie Austin reports.
Shutters down, empty platforms. It's the most disruptive train strike yet.
I've got no train. So now I've just rang my husband. He's got to drive 2 hours, well, longer than that, down to here to pick me up.
Everything's been on price, so they need to be paid for the work they're doing. But I don't like the strike, you know.
So for my money, 100% behind them, all power to them, and I hope they win.
Karen from Staffordshire is running the London Marathon tomorrow to raise money for the hospital where she had breast cancer treatment. News of the strike meant changing her plans to get there.
So for me, this just blew everything apart. I couldn't even begin to think of how we would get there. So I just worried. And until we knew what our plan was, I just panicked.
The red lines on this map show the only parts of the rail network where some trains are running today. Large parts of England, Scotland and Wales have none at all. Where there have been trains today, they started a lot later than usual and they finished earlier as well. Nothing at all has been running between London and some other major cities, including Edinburgh, Newcastle and Brighton. The train drivers' union, ASLEV, is demanding a pay rise amid high inflation. The RMT wants that for its rail worker members too, and it argues job security and working conditions are under threat. It says its current mandate for strike action lasts until late November.
We'll be commencing a reballot next week, so that process will be underway, and then we expect a very healthy return and a fresh mandate that will go through to the middle of next year if that's what's needed. But we don't want that. We'd rather get a settlement and get this dispute out of the way and get back to normal.
Rail industry bosses say they want to give a pay rise, but the impact of the pandemic on finances and travel patterns means reforms must be agreed to afford it.
We're looking to standardise areas of working practices that will then allow us to be able to give staff an increase. But we can't forget there's a £2 billion funding gap and there's no new money. We've got to generate that money from within the industry.
Negotiations continue, and the new Transport Secretary recently met with the RMT and ASLEV leaders. But there's been no breakthrough, and unions have made it clear more strikes could be coming down the track. Katie Austin, BBC News.
Also walking out today, Royal Mail workers are on their second day of a 48-hour strike in a dispute over pay and conditions. The Communication Workers Union says the walkout by around 115,000 of its members is the biggest strike of the year. A Royal Mail spokesman described the action as reckless because it would weaken the company's finances and jeopardise workers' job security. The Prime Minister, Liz Truss, has admitted there has been disruption in the UK economy following the mini-budget last week. The government unveiled £45 billion of tax cuts funded by borrowing, but didn't accompany it with the usual economic assessment of the plans. This worried investors. It comes as the Conservative Party conference is set to get underway in Birmingham. Our Deputy Political Editor, Vicky Young, is there. Vicky, the Prime Minister is due to arrive shortly. How much pressure is she going to be under from her own party? Well, look, she's only been Prime Minister, less than a month. But of course, that economic intervention has caused ructions, really, not just in the markets, but in her party too. So the question is, the next 4 days, they're going to have to mull over those decisions, to dissect them, and in her case, to defend them. And she's done that today in a newspaper article, following the same theme as before, really, saying, look, I'm trying to do things differently. I want to bring growth to this country. And that means there's going to be, she says, disruption in the short term. And not everyone will like what we're doing. But what they're trying to say is that they have a plan. Now, ministers have talked a lot about a bigger picture, a whole package of measures. We're going to hear more about that in the coming weeks. But one of the things that Tory MPs I've been speaking to are concerned about is this talk now of spending cuts, trimming the fat, as one cabinet minister put it. But some are saying, look, if you're going to cut the top rate of tax, 45p for the wealthiest, and then you don't put up benefits in line with inflation, they say that is going to jar. Now, the big question over the next few days, are we going to see any rowing back from any of that by Liz Truss and her ministers? And if not, what will those unhappy Tory MPs decide to do about it? Vicky, thank you very much. Vicky Young. Well, tomorrow, Liz Truss will be answering questions from my colleague Laura Koonsberg.
Tomorrow morning, we'll be speaking live to the Prime Minister, Liz Truss. Join me then here in Birmingham at the earlier time of 8:30 on BBC One. See you then.
The cost of gas and electricity for millions of households has risen from today, with a typical annual bill going up to £2,500, twice as high as last winter. But the government has brought in a number of measures to try to help with the increase, as our business correspondent Simon Browning now reports.
In different corners of the country this afternoon, protests. Coordinated demonstrations about the cost of living. From today, 25 million households are paying more for their energy.
I'm on a pension. Every penny that they charge me for the oil is out of my purse, that I have less to spend on food or whatever I need.
Walk into a supermarket. Last night, for instance, there was a difference in £2 in a product from 3 days ago that I looked at.
In Belfast, Newcastle, Leeds, London and Birmingham, protests that enough is enough as prices rise and the impact it has on consumers struggling with their bills. The government's huge package of energy support fixes the amount you pay per unit of energy you use. The typical household with average energy usage and paying by direct debit will now pay £2,500 for their energy. Prepayment will cost more, but the more energy you use, the more you will pay. All UK households will be given a £400 discount on their energy bills from October, arranged by energy companies. More cost of living payments are available for pensioners, those on disability payments and low-income homes. But fuel poverty charities are already concerned.
The level of support for everybody has been really, really welcomed, but the depth and the severity of the issue for millions of householders is not being satisfactorily affected by this price support. So for some households, they simply need more financial support to get through the winter.
Do you know how it works?
On a visit to British Gas yesterday, the Prime Minister said it was important that government took steps to deal with the costs faced by households by putting in place its energy plans. But Liz Truss says she did not want to raise taxes, but instead increase borrowing to pay for the support. The price cap will soften the impact of higher energy costs. But as bills go up, the advice is to use less if you can, as the colder months arrive. Simon Browning, BBC News.
Russia says it's pulled its troops out of the town of Lyman in the eastern Donetsk region after they were surrounded by Ukrainian armed forces. Video footage shared online shows Ukrainian soldiers waving their national flag on the outskirts of the town. Lyman was a key strategic target used by Russia as a major logistics hub. At least 23 people have been killed in Florida by Hurricane Ian, which has since been lashing the coast of South Carolina. Storm surges have flooded parts of the historic city of Charleston, and hundreds of thousands of homes and businesses are without electricity. A huge cleanup operation is underway in Florida. Early insurance estimates put the cost of the damage there at a minimum of $40 billion. Football and the Premier League has returned after the international break. Arsenal remain top of the table after beating North London rivals Tottenham Hotspur 3-1 at the Emirates. Adam Wilde reports.
As the Premier League resumes, rivalries renew, but in truth, some are never really too far away. Still, with the impressive start to the season both Arsenal and Spurs are enjoying, this North London derby felt just a little different. Amidst the intensity, the atmosphere, a party.
Chance to shoot!
Thomas Partey's precision was perfect. Spurs, though, has scored more in this fixture than Harry Kane. He never looked like missing here. But the Lloris inexplicably the ball through his hands. Spurs a goal down. Moments later, a man down. Emerson Royale's challenge was as high as it was reckless. It would be his final contribution.
We're back with the late news at 10:05. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Goodbye.
We all have to be a part of it. It can't just be activists and environmentalists and animal lovers that fight for the natural world. Athletes all have a very big platform and can speak to the fans of their sport, show them that there's a way to do things a little bit better on this planet. The BBC Green Sport Awards, Tuesday the 4th of October on the BBC Sport website and iPlayer.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching BBC News with me, Sean Lay. Now, 27 people are known to have been killed by Hurricane Ian as it lashed the coast of South Carolina after bringing widespread destruction to Florida earlier this week and before that to Cuba. The historic coastal city of Charleston has been lashed by winds and heavy rain. The BBC's Nada Tawfik is in southwest Florida from where she sent this update.
The Category 1 storm made landfall Friday afternoon near Georgetown, just north of the historic city of Charleston, with winds of 85 miles per hour. Its powerful storm surge downed power lines, plunging 400,000 people into darkness and left some stranded. At Pawleys Island, local police captured the end of a pier collapsing before it floated away. Officials did not feel evacuations were necessary, but they have urged residents to avoid going out.
So if you don't need to go outside in the wind right now, stay inside. If you don't need to drive anywhere, don't drive. Be careful and be smart.
Still, the damage was nowhere near as devastating as in Florida, where the Coast Guard had to rescue people by helicopter from barrier islands cut off from the mainland. And beach destinations along the southwest coast, such as Fort Myers, were battered and forever transformed.
Clearly, there's still a lot of cleanup ahead. And besides the personal loss from this storm, businesses are now going to be suffering too. Right ahead of what should have been a busy tourist season here, the beaches, the marinas are devastated.
The storm-weary lined up for hours to purchase petrol and water. They all said this was unlike any storm they'd ever experienced.
Honestly, it's sad. Hearing all the stories about it, my friend's house, underwater. So everyone that I grew up with, everyone that I knew, their houses are all underneath water, and it's sad.
After making landfall twice in the United States, Ian is forecast to weaken rapidly. It will now move inland. Nada Tawfik, BBC News on the southwest coast of Florida.
In Tunisia, people have been taking to the streets this week to protest at the high cost of living and food shortages. More than half of the population is now living in poverty, and almost 700,000 people have left the country heading for Europe since the start of the year. Our Middle East correspondent